welcome up our panellists for the rail discussion next. We'll be joined by Graham Botham from Network Rail, by Tim Hedley Jones from Virgin Trains. If you could join me on the front, Paul Staples from First Group and TransPennine Express, and Amanda White from Transport for Greater Manchester and Rail North Partnership. I know a lot of people in the room very, very interested in rail, and we've got people from various pressure groups and campaigning for their line to be reopened or investment in their stations. So please do start putting your hands up and I'll come to you. If not, then just flap around and I'll definitely come to you the second time around. Yeah, we've got those microphones roaming the floor. If I could just start with you, Tim Hedley Jones. We've heard a lot about the public sector intervention, but looking from the private sector point of view, what are the ideal circumstances for the train operating companies to be able to really fulfill their potential?
I think the key thing for us is really the ability to deliver the big investments that we've got planned as part of our franchise, to have good strategic relationships with rolling stock manufacturers. So we're delivering a new fleet of 65 Hitachi-built trains that will transform the East Coast Main Line, and that for us is critical to the success of our franchise business plan.
Okay, and in terms of Network Rail, we've seen a lot of delivery in the past few years locally with Northern Hub, now the Great North Rail project, which is linking up across the north. Tell us a bit about where we're up to with that programme.
So thanks, Paul. So I think people will have seen around the north and around Manchester in particularly how train services have been changing. We started with the ones to London, and you'll more recently have seen through Northern Hub and North West electrification new electric trains operating between Leeds, Manchester and Scotland. You'll also have seen the changes that are happening in the city centre stations, the transformation that we did with TfGM at Manchester Victoria. And then start looking to things like the opening up of the Ordsall Chord, which is really, really going to transform journey times across the north of England, connecting places that have never been connected before, bringing Rochdale and the Calder Valley and Bradford connected through southern Manchester into Manchester Airport and beyond. And then we've got the pieces that come next. At the end of the year, we'll provide government with options for further improvements to the route between Leeds, Manchester and York, as well as the work that I'm sure David Brown shared this morning about what might a totally transformed intercity rail network look like as part of Northern Powerhouse Rail.
And there's always lots going on at TfGM in terms of the next big sort of power grab or the next funding bid, which Manchester and the combined authority is so effective at. One of the big headline grabbing ones recently was about the control of the rail stations. Can you give us an update on that and what the sort of business case is for that, Amanda?
So we submitted our business case into government in March, early this year. That's just an outline business case, so at this stage we're still looking at a number of different options. But our recommendation is that we'd like to take full operational control for the stations in Manchester, but also take the assets from Network Rail on a 150-year lease. And this is not about a power control or a land grab as such. It's about driving the right outcomes for our customers. I mean, frankly, GMCA don't care who delivers these outcomes, but they want to see somebody incentivized to do that, and they want to see certainty of delivery around it. And what I'm talking about here is not just better facilities at stations, but integrated transport, and the perfect presentation that we just saw from James as well, which talks about how you can bring stations back into the community and make them part of a regeneration focus for a city centre. And honestly, with the new mayoral powers, we really are in a good, strong position to take that remit and deliver on those objectives around stations.
And I know from speaking to some of the property developers in our readership that they're interested to hear how easy or otherwise it will be to take an old ticket office and change of use and put commercial in, or I know the press release that came out was sort of saying there'll be GP surgeries and yoga studios and things like that. I mean, how easy is it to change the use and prepare those for commercial occupiers?
I think there's two very different types of station environments. One is where you can completely separate the operations from the building assets. Where we can do that, and we've got a great example at Earlham Station in Greater Manchester, where you can do that, I think you can really simplify the processes and the approvals to get in and bring in different uses to stations. A number of the stations in Greater Manchester are quite complex and just completely integrated into the operation of the railway. That's going to be more difficult, but what we have to do is identify where we've got those opportunities and start to deliver as soon as we can.
And Tim, that's something you've worked on from the station owning point of view.
Yeah, certainly. We've been operating on 99-year leases for 9 of our 11 stations since 2015, and we found it a really positive experience for a number of reasons. First of all, we've been able to take land into the station lease area, which had previously been unused by the railway within Network Rail's ownership, but not within the lease of the station, and turn that into viable car parking to increase capacity at our stations, for example, at Retford. We've also been able to do things like convert the upper floor of Berwick-upon-Tweed station so that it's now habitable, and we're looking at whether we market that as a residence. There are people who would like to live on top of a railway station, I can assure you, or even perhaps let it out as a holiday let. And that is space that had been doing nothing since privatisation, but you know, there is the ability now to take control of the asset more, because we're very much on the ground, much harder for Network Rail because of the size of its estate, and actually do something viable with it.
And Paul, from First Group and TransPennine Express point of view, what we're talking about here is handling increased capacity, because there's been a great take-up of rail over the last few years. Tell us about what you're doing as a year into the latest franchise, is that right? Well,
the TfGM, the Northern franchises, were let on playing their part in the capacity growth. So what we're doing on behalf of the regional and central governments is introducing £500 million worth of new rolling stock. So our particular rolling stock wasn't that old, but it was full up effectively. So we'll be introducing 220 new carriages. We're getting rid of some of the older ones, but we will end up with 50% more carriages. And then that turns into a revised timetable in conjunction with the infrastructure development, so that we end up offering huge increases in the number of seats, 13 million passenger journeys a year extra, and in those critical peak journeys and peak locations, up to 80% increases in the amount of seats available.
And when might people start to see the delivery of some of those extra seats? Are there key milestones we should look out for in the next couple of years?
Yes, the first of our new rolling stock arrives in May 2018. That's when customers will start to be offered journeys on it. We'll be introducing it and testing it and doing training on it before then, of course. But they'll start to ride on those trains in May 18, and everything done by the end of 2019.
And how do we plan for the future so that we don't get to the stage of overcrowding that many people have had to put up with?
I was going to say the $6 million question. It's probably the $60 billion question, isn't it? I think as an industry, we need to be skilled enough to understand the value of rolling stock investments and infrastructure investments and capacity growth, so that we can make the case for earlier investment. It's always very difficult when you're competing for national resources and values to make a case beyond the very obvious burning platform questions. But if we can start to do that, the dream for customers, for everyday commuters, is that the rolling stock arrives just before the train gets too crowded for them to get on it. And that's what we have to, I think cohesively as an industry, have to try and be clever enough to do.
And as franchisees, do you think that the current system is working? Or do you think that are there changes you'd like to see to enable that smooth programming going forward?
I think it's working a lot better than it's discussed, or than the public discourse would have us believe. I would say it's suffered some wobbles in the last few years, some various disruptive events that have given it a bad press, if you like. But From my perspective, I think if you look at the franchising process, we see the contracting party, the Rail North Partnerships, for example, in this region, able to decide what the goalposts are for a certain chunk of time and then commit and let the free market compete for that work. And then at the end of that chunk of time, they can come back and move the goalposts and set new strategic priorities and then let the market have a competitive go at that new set of goalposts, if you like. So I think it's actually proven to be more flexible than it's given credit for.
Tim, do you want to add?
Yeah, I'd largely agree with that. But I would say that there are ways in which I think the system could be improved. For example, if you take our franchise, which was let in 2015, runs to 2023, the bid itself was put together in 2014. So if you think about the people who are putting that bid together, thinking about what things like technology strategies, ticket retailing strategies might have been in 2014, I think it's not unreasonable to think that you can't predict the future to the extent that it can be a franchise business plan is viable right up to the end. So I think there needs to be more flexibility in terms of some of the committed outputs so that there's a dialogue between the Department of Transport and franchisees because it's impossible for someone to predict exactly where a business will be going in 2023. Clearly there are some things which the department needs to contract with franchises, and one of the areas where we've discussed with the department in relation to rolling stock improvements is around having a sort of a specimen scheme where you ballpark and sort of put a fence around a committed investment amount, but don't pin down the exact deliverables until one is clear about exactly what outputs are best for the franchise at that time.
And from an infrastructure point of view, are you confident that you're getting the buy-in from government for further investment, given the upheaval, whether it's at Network Rail or TfGM, given everything that's going on, the distractions, the civil service looking at Brexit budgets and this, that and the other, are you confident?
Working very closely with confidence is an interesting thing, but the government will are on track to announce their next rail investment strategy over the coming months. On behalf of the industry, we've led the input into that, working with colleagues around here to put forward those proposals for more seats, faster journeys, better connections, both into city centres from places where people live in between cities. There are lots of things out there that can happen. One of the benefits of devolution is that we get to work both with the city regions and with Transport for the North about what are the North's priorities in that process, so that the North can say what it is it needs and why it needs it, and move away from some of those discussions we were having earlier about how you appraise transport schemes using the more traditional methodologies.
To add to that, we've been afforded a luxury of being creative about what we want to see from the future of the rail network, and also through city devolution deals. So if you think about HS2, Northern Powerhouse Rail, we have got certainty now, certainly for TransPennine and Northern franchise, so the sort of 5-year time frame feels pretty certain. But when you look beyond that, we've got HS2 out in 2033, the midterm does feel very uncertain. And I think we've got a turbulent time to just stop and think and create some certainty around what that period looks like post HS2 phase 1 arriving, the impact that has on franchises right up to phase 2 arriving, and the infrastructure fix that we need to meet the capacity in the middle there. So I think we haven't been distracted, we've been having fun thinking about the really long-term outputs, but we do need to come in a little closer and think about mid-term certainty to make sure that we get the scarce funding committed to that for that time period.
And where does devolution fit into this in terms of having metro mayors for the city regions? You've got Liverpool, Manchester, some regions don't have them, but how does that plug into the sort of transport policy world?
I mean, for us, there's a number of ways across rail. So obviously we're a very active part of the Rail North Partnership and feeding into the Northern Powerhouse work stream. So that's sort of business as usual for us now. The very bottom or most detailed place that we're working is around the stations transfer, obviously, and Network Rail and the operators will always be our partners in delivering whatever the outcome is there. And I'm determined that we see some improvements at those stations in the next 24 months, regardless of the outcomes with DfT. But also, we're thinking about our local transport plans, so our 2040 transport plan. Earlier, Richard Leese mentioned our Transport Fund 2 conversations that we're currently having with Treasury. And really, that's about the importance of securing your local rapid transit networks, wrapping highways and active travel around that to make sure that you're plugged in and you can feed those corridors between the major cities.
And we've heard about Northern Powerhouse Rail, sometimes called HS3. From a funding point of view, is there anything you can tell us about the model that's being looked at there, Graham?
From a funding point of view, the model, undoubtedly there's going to be a range of models, aren't there, for any transport investment, and particularly any transport investment that unlocks economic growth. I think the challenge we're all wrestling in as partners is how you unlock where the benefits come to help fund what the growth is, and that doesn't necessarily flow through the rail industry fare box. As decisions are taken to not increase fares, which you can understand as political decisions, then as that happens, how you find the way to channel in some of the private sector growth that happens to fund that scheme is an interesting challenge for us going forward.
Or indeed other parts of government as well. For our stations business case, we did 2 economic appraisals, one for the Department for Transport, another one for DCLG. So that can answer the question that came from the audience earlier around trying to, again, be more creative about looking to different parts of government for separate funding streams to come together for one social or economic benefit within an area.
I think we can see that at York, where Network Rail is working with Homes and Communities Agency to unlock the potential of the York Central development site, and I think what our challenge is to make sure that the benefits that arise from delivering the City of York a new district for itself within the city centre doesn't mean that the railway doesn't benefit in terms of opportunities to improve the facility at York Station.
And in terms of the land holdings of Network Rail, there's I've forever throughout my career writing about property seemed to have done features about Network Rail reviewing its land holdings and releasing them soon to developers. But it seems to take a very long time for some of these holdings to come forward. Is there any update on when that might be released?
So we're in the process of releasing land.
Nice and clearly. I think the microphone's having trouble picking you up.
So
Sorry.
we're in the process of releasing land for 3,500 homes to be built at the moment. We're in the process of seeking to reinvest the benefits of land sales. So we are not seeking to hold on to land where there is not an obvious transport use. And we are wanting to move that on quite quickly.
Any more specific than quite quickly? Do we know where?
So what do you want me to say? Because you're then into the specifics.
Happening. On Friday, I was passed a disposal notice by Network Rail for a site in Wakefield. It used to be the Wakefield Power Station. There are plans there to turn that into domestic housing. So I think it needs to be tackled on a local level, looking for opportunities at particular locations, and I think it's starting to happen.
Okay. Anybody from the floor want to join in now? I've warmed them all up. There's one here at our favourite table at the front.
Hello, I'm Andy Shackleton, and I represent a group called CELRAP, which is short for Skipton East Lancashire Re-Election Partnership, and we've been campaigning for 16 years to have the railway line between Skipton and Combe reassembled. David Miliband years ago was quoted as saying that good ideas don't go away. Now, our idea hasn't gone away. It's garnered a huge amount of support from ministerial level to local authority level to LEPs to the rail industry to the private sector. What we're up against now is a time frame. We've heard all sorts of interesting comments about enhancements to infrastructure and what have you. But then we've heard dates like 2050, when many of us, including myself, won't be around. We've heard Man quoting 2033. What's to stop a project like this forming a template that would give us a good base to know what to do to reopen a railway. Local authorities know all too well how to build a road, but it's a bit like Brexit. Few of them actually know what to do when it comes to reopening a railway. Could I have some ideas, please, on how you reopen a railway, how you get this infrastructure in a time frame that somebody that's 70 years old like me can get my head around? Thank you.
And obviously there are others. There's ones in mid-Cheshire, there's ones into North Wales and around Merseyside. Lots of examples of small lines that are very important to connect communities. Anybody want to?
So I think,
Yeah.
Andy, you're talking about a template,
Yes.
and you and I have had discussions about this over the years, haven't we? You know, a really, really good template is what's happened on East West Rail. The railway has been reopened between Oxford and Bicester. The funding was found, the commercial case for those train services was made, and initially the private sector invested in doing that. Taking that a stage further to the connections to Milton Keynes and Bedford, a lot of the government funding was unlocked by the locality coming forward as the East West Rail Consortium with a contribution of circa £50 million to see that come through. You know, that was probably one of the biggest things in terms of that template that unlocked East West Rail.
Yep, please do, yeah. Yeah, there we go.
We're working again. But we're talking here of a 25-year campaign to put it back together again. It's like Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and nobody seemed to be able to put it back together again in anything like a time frame that we can understand. And I still don't get the idea how can we get these things happening like within 4 or 5 years rather than in 24 or 5 years. That's the rub. We need to get a way of cutting through all the nonsense. And I used another word there, but I refrained.
But the nonsense is the funding, isn't it?
Well,
So if we're entirely honest, the nonsense is finding the right package
Yes.
of people who are going to benefit and are prepared to put the money into it to make that case to get on with it. That's the biggest thing. That is the biggest bit about unlocking East West Rail.
And then we have Network Rail completely 100% on side.
We were and are 100% on side with East West Rail.
Thank you.
So is the onus on residents and businesses to make the case to government, to yourselves, for the specific projects, for those budgets to be unlocked?
Can I help out?
Yeah.
So I think Andy's committed a lot of time and done a very good job of making the case to all the relevant stakeholders and has good stakeholder groups supporting this development. All we've been able to do so far is make sure that this scheme sits within the right strategic plans within the rail industry ownership and within local ownership. So I know it's within our 10-year rail plan at TfGM, it sits within the long-term rail strategy for Rail North, and presumably then it will go forward into the North of England route study and sit within Network Rail's plan. But it all, as you said, it comes down to funding and priorities, given the different projects trying to reach those priorities at the moment. That's where you start to come across the 10 to 15-year timelines, which do frustrate.
And from a train operating company's point of view, you'll be the people that will have to serve those lines if there's new or reopened lines. How does that play out?
Yeah, I mean, I can't comment on reopening lines that have been closed, but I can comment on getting funding to rebuild and redevelop stations. And certainly, I think the secret of that is getting really good quality relationships working at a local level. So when we rebuilt Wakefield Westgate Station, we formed a very close partnership with Network Rail and with Wakefield Council and with the third-party developer of the site around the station to get together and say, let's access the funding and let's deliver this project quickly. Because as you say, these things can carry on forever and ever. And we actually, by doing that, we did something which people said, that's never going to happen, it's going to take you 10 years to do. One of the things we did do, though, was to be realistic about what we could achieve with the funding that was available And there have been lots of schemes for putting in sort of terminating platforms and moving the track here, moving signals there. And that was beyond our capability and budget. And what we could do was provide a much better environment for customers at the station. And we achieved that within 3 years. So I think that's one answer.
Paul, yeah.
I think the other thing to note is it's not all just about funding. It's important to campaign, and during the previous TransPennine Express franchise, when we were watching the debate going over the specification for the new franchise, we noticed different regions campaigning in different ways for influencing that specification activity, and some were more effective than others. It sounds like you've done a great job from what Amanda was saying in terms of making your case. In addition to the funding, there's the vast weight of activity at the moment in the industry. So there are other constraints like the physical equipment and the people to do the work. So there's a huge list of things that all have to fall into place before these proposals can run.
Question in the centre there, yeah.
Good morning, and nice to see you all again. Roy Chapman from Limwood Transtech. I was really inspired with the presentation by Paul and James earlier on, going back to that and some aspects of what they were talking about in terms of concentration of populations and density. Bit of a comment, if you look at a map of Manchester in 1910, and if Doctor Who was a transport planner, he would go back at his TARDIS and he would say, for God's sake, don't shut that line through Worsley and Little Holton, don't shut the line through to the Tilsley Loop, etc., don't close the line through Cheal Heath and Stockport. One of the issues about network rail and expansion, I agree with what you say about East-West Rail. When I was with British Rail, I worked on that in the 1980s, and it seemed like an awful long time ago. It was a branch line then. One of the issues about network rail, and this is where I'm putting you on the spot, Graham, are the discussions about cost. We all look value for money. I've got a builder who started work at my house today, and I will bloody well project manage him to make sure I get value for money. One of the criticisms that came of network rail from the Scottish Government and others is the escalating costs of rail projects. And in terms of Northern Hope, that's led to delays in terms of Oxford Road and Manchester Piccadilly, which really should have been there before the Orstall Court, but they weren't, but they're going to be delayed now. And what's the view of the panel on that in driving down the building costs? We can build more railways and maybe even rail open CELRA, but open lines in Manchester, if we can get those costs down to what might be a more realistic level. And coupled with that, Graham, we do have a skills shortage in terms of engineers and so on that build these railways, and you may have a view on that as well.
Graham, on cost.
Okay, so I guess there's a couple of questions in there, Roy. So if we take the costs first, so let's be clear a couple of things. There are a number of independent reports that talk about the recent cost increases that have been reported being all about the fact that projects were committed to be done before they were fully understood and before the costs associated with building them were clear. That's come out in a number of government reports and led to some changes both by ourselves and the Department for Transport in terms of how we manage those. Also, picking up on the cost issue, we are not precious about who builds this stuff. We recently commissioned the Hansford Review to look at how you break down the barriers for other people coming in and building stuff on the railway, and are looking forward to, there's a number of people we are in discussions with about how that might happen. But you can quote examples, and Borders Rail would be one of them, where the private sector was originally going to deliver it, and Network Rail was asked to come in and take it over. And I think we've seen Borders delivered to budget and to time. If we pick up the question on skills, we have one of the largest apprentice programmes and one of the largest graduate programmes in the country. We've got a centre at Westwood that provides national training for over 300 graduates, and that's doubling in size in the next year. And those people are based out in jobs across the country. There's many of them working out of delivery units, both in Manchester, in Stockport, in Preston, and across the northwest. Coupled to that, and the graduate programme, the new high-speed rail colleges, I think you begin to see how both Network Rail and the industry are investing in growing engineers across the industry. But my colleagues want to say more about other aspects of engineering.
Yeah, I mean, we've identified for many years now the risk to the engineering industry, which is my profession, and I think to many other sectors in the field as well, of retirement profiles and abstractions from other sectors of industry, that we will be short of people if we're not careful, and that's compounded by the sheer weight of improvement and investment that's happening in the industry now. So things like the rebirth of the apprenticeship scheme and making that into a really effective means of delivering very competent people into highly skilled jobs is a vital part of what we're doing. And also I think the recent rail projects, some in this region, some outside this region, have had a good press, and we've seen television programmes about them. That helps to raise the profile of those jobs amongst the future workforce. We have to make engineering in the rail industry attractive, because when people get there, they find it immensely fulfilling and immensely interesting. It's not always the easiest sell at the milk rounds.
Question in the centre, yeah.
Downtown in business. Looking at the big picture, it remains the case that transport investment in London and the South East, I think, is 10 to 1 compared to the rest of the country. And I've always understood it as one of the reasons for this is on the Treasury model for funding, you can always make a case. I mean, mention was made about Milton Keynes and Oxford, and that's the sort of golden triangle. You can always make a case, a cost-benefit case on economic grounds, the economic impact, and that's one of the main reasons why there's this huge disparity. I'm very interested to hear about all the models that we're putting together with business and so on. Are they going to compensate for that, or is the Treasury model that has led to this gap still going to be a major factor and a major handicap, particularly in the delivery of things like Northern Power Rail across, from Liverpool to Hull?
Who wants to take on the Treasury? It's yeah, go on.
With the Great Work in Manchester, we're obviously trying to build a case within our means, within our area of control. So in some respects, we're not taking on the South for major infrastructure schemes with our Transport Fund too. I think what we're doing is being, again, more creative about using what's been given to us in our devolution deal, which actually surprises me to understand that it's a bigger devolution deal than London, in that we have policing and skills and housing and health in addition to transport. So how do we build those things to create a really convincing argument which says the economic growth as a whole will give you more than if you just focus on individual sector schemes in the rest of the country, and that's certainly what we're trying to do within our devolution powers.
I think I'd add to that it's other factors as well that will help to redress that balance. So, we have seen the investment in the West Coast Main Line in terms of Virgin's investment in its new fleet and the increase in services to Manchester. That has significantly driven up revenue on the West Coast Main Line. And that's exactly what we want to do on the East Coast Main Line with our new trains and improve connectivity of the North with the rest of the country. So our new timetables will reduce journey time from Newcastle by about 17 minutes on average and from York to London by 9 minutes on average. So that will all help to improve the connectivity of the North with the rest of the country. I think it's also fair to say that investment in the South itself isn't necessarily a bad thing for the North, and I'm thinking in particular about the transformation of King's Cross as a station, where your impression of the north of England is formed by the moment you walk through the portals of that station. And anyone who will have queued up around the corner of Burger King in the old King's Cross concourse to the south of the station will realise that actually your impression of the north was sort of very much sort of the opening credits of Get Carter in terms of that experience. Whereas now, what you get is a much more airy, lighter, cleaner, newer feel, which frankly informs the feeling that anybody travelling north from London will have. If you then combine that with investment in the stations in the north, such as Newcastle and York, with new train services, you're actually going a huge way to improve the overall quality and relationship between the north and the south.
I think we need to just make the case. We heard from Liam earlier at Merseyrail that they're forecasting a £3 billion investment, achieving a £16 billion economic effect. And we know from our own experience in the very first TransPennine franchise, we introduced those Class 185s, which was investment in the north, and there was a huge return. We doubled our ridership, and all those people were only going somewhere because it made economic sense to do so. So we know there's a good case. I think we have to be proud of what we have achieved and can achieve, and just make that case, and not maybe compare ourselves with the economic realities of that vast thing down in London, because we can make our own success story.
So what would you say to business gathered here today in terms of helping make that case? How can they get involved and show that industry does respond well to infrastructure investment, and if anything, the ratio should be tipped the other way to help close the gap in productivity between the north and the south? How can people get involved?
Well, I think the comparative case is not the right one to make, because we Northern Patriots have to accept some harsh realities about the economic scale of the activity down in London, and what they need to do to keep that supported. But we have to make our own case and talk about the industrial success stories, the sophisticated manufacturing we've heard today. There's a great story about untapped potential of just what we could do without busting any of the benchmarks that are set by the big capital cities of the world. There's a huge amount of potential growth here. And we've heard today about how we can help to make this location more attractive for highly skilled people to come and live their lives and work their lives here.
There have been some protests and complaints in the press about the franchise system, that specifications can change once they've been awarded and once they start operating. We've heard about increased fares that weren't expected, and changes to services, in some cases longer services, cuts to services. And what reassurances or what response can you give to those sorts of comments?
I don't know what Tim's view is. It doesn't feel as though there are any concessions made during the franchise management process. So I think if there are changes made, and Tim spoke earlier of the need for flexibility to adapt to suit the region's requirements as well as ours, it's a negotiation, and it's a consultation, and it's done with the best interests of the customers in mind.
I think it's very much a case of franchises continuing to deliver growth. Both TransPennine and ourselves will be delivering new rolling stock over the next couple of years, and delivering improvements to stations, and that is a reflection of the commitments that were made in those franchise agreements with the DfT, and it is very much a partnership between ourselves and the department that delivers the outputs for customers. I mean, I think in terms of the answer to the question around how can business get more involved, I think in the past the railway has viewed itself as a bit of a closed system that just operates on itself, and increasingly I think the solutions that will deliver benefits for rail passengers are to be found outside the railway network, and we do need to form better strategic partnerships with local enterprise partnerships, local authorities, and other groups to deliver benefits.
Okay, one question here.
Pete Black, I'm a transport planner, but I'm here representing Friends of Arkle Station, which is one of the stations that's kind of fallen through the cracks in the paving slabs. It does 500,000 passengers a year, but our station was knocked down in the 1960s, and we've got a couple of concrete waiting shelters which are just about suitable for pigs, but not for anybody else to wait in. We've put together a scheme, or in the process of putting together a scheme, with TfGM that would replace it with something that's a completely new build station building. And I'd just like to say that we fully support TfGM's efforts to take over local stations, because otherwise there's no prospect for hundreds of stations across Britain to be improved under the current sort of national and franchising arrangements. So we think that TfGM's model could be a model for across the whole of the north of England. So I'd like to say thank you for that. I'd just like to comment on the forecasting. I think the conventional method of forecasting under BCRs and user benefits will never ever result in substantial improvements for the north. And I gather that Northern Powerhouse Rail BCRs are either less than 1, and some of them are negative. So,
BCR for those?
Benefit cost ratio. So the Treasury are never going to finance Northern Powerhouse Rail as it stands. So we do need to move to a different model, and we're quite well placed in the north to develop that. And I understand that TfGM are doing some work on moving from predict and provide, which is the current sort of road and rail method of forecasting, into a vision and validate model. So rather than just counting out how many cars you think are going to be on the roads in 10 years' time, you have a vision for what sort of city you want. And I think we're all agreed that we want the compact city that we heard about earlier. And then you validate whether you can get to that by transport and education and housing and other interventions. So I think we need to move to a whole new forecasting scenario, and we're never going to get any substantial improvements otherwise. Interested in comments?
Amanda, can you shed any light on the financing models that are being looked at?
I think if my modelling team were here, they'd be able to tell you all about it. I think what I would say is that in different parts of our agenda within TfGM, we're using different approaches to try and extract as many benefits as possible and align them with the processes that exist within government. So for example, at Manchester Piccadilly and Manchester Airport, we are developing growth strategies, and that's all about making sure that we protect not only transport, but regeneration, business and community outcomes that are right for the future of Greater Manchester there. So I can only support what you're saying. We do need to look for different ways of reaching out to bring those benefits together.
Graham, you want to add?
It's absolutely true that we've got to move beyond just forecasting what would happen anyway. I would argue that we've already started, that we've already working together, and this is not just a Network Rail thing, have started to do that. The Northern Hub was not designed to cope with growth. That wasn't what it was about. It wasn't even the bit of the business case that anybody was interested in wasn't the bit that said what a benefit cost ratio is. It was the piece of work actually that Greater Manchester did that said it equated to about 20 to 30,000 extra jobs. That's the piece. And any business case that goes to government, that BCR is only one part of it. In terms of how can people in this room help, casting that picture that says, if you do this, there are some real investments that will generate jobs that people will make. Not the ones that I can get some modeller to come up with to say, if you did this, models say that, but actually real examples of things that will happen. Amanda's example of the work we're doing together at Piccadilly on the growth partnership is absolutely spot on in that respect. So there is a lot we can do to work within what's already there, because I think people are up for hearing it. They're not as... It's maybe just some of the officials who get fixated with what's the number. I actually don't think that's what the politicians look at all.
And Paul and Tim, from a private sector point of view, what do you think the response would be if your finance directors or your friends in the city are asked to fund the Northern Powerhouse Rail? Can you see that being welcomed?
Well, I think that whole approach of vision and validate is exactly what I was talking about earlier in terms of not specifying down to the nth number of cycle spaces at a station, but actually saying, what is the place we want to create here, and then working out how you can actually get there in terms of funding. And a discussion about how you can fund something is always something that's my finance director certainly always wants to have a talk about. So coming to finance directors with fait accomplis is not something that goes down particularly well.
I think it's much the same story, really. I think most of the owning companies, and I guess especially Virgin and First, are open for business, and we just need to be really sophisticated in how we create the business cases for these things and think ahead and play to the emotional link as well as just the purely hard number link. We need to recognise how it will change society to make these investments.
Okay. If there's no further questions, I think we'll thank our panel and draw it to a close. Thank you.